Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of talent development. Today, I am joined by special guest Shane Jacob. Welcome to the show, Shane.
Jay, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Shane, can you give a little background about yourself and how you got into the talent development space to our audience?
I will. Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate your show too. A lot of people don't know this about me is that I am a farrier, also known as a horseshoer, also known as a blacksmith. A forge is something that I'm very familiar with in our industry. It used to be coal forges. Now we use gas forges, but I like the name of your show. I've uh, for several decades now, I've been in the horse industry in many different facets of the horse industry. I've been fortunate and blessed enough to be able to work with horses, which is what I love to be doing. And that's led me to several things. I have Jacob Livestock, which is a retail horse feed company here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Uh, and we've been doing that for that company was established a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. I also have an auction services company where we sell personal property. It started out as a horse auction. Um, and uh, and then I have a small coaching business too. All of these things require um, cooperation from people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what have you learned? Obviously, with all of this experience, and kind of one of the interesting things to me when I had looked at your profile, and I thought it would be really valuable to kind of talk about what experiences can we learn from working outside of talent development? So, say through the horsemanship journey that you've been working with people on, and through your experience there, what helps you, or what tactics, strategies have you pulled from that experience to be able to bring into your coaching?
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. It's interesting in that a lot of the principles that we see, let me just back up. The relationship that man has with a horse is just that, it's a relationship. And while horses have different brains than human beings, they're extremely reactive and less reasoning. However, there's so many similarities, and horses display those similarities incredibly well, which is one of the things that we use. When in dealing with, I'll come back to a little bit of, maybe making some relations to horses that are kind of interesting and fun to look at. Um, the first principle, basically, we have 5 principles that we use with our people, okay, that we've just honed them down to 5, and they're pretty big, but there's 5. And the first one is just to know that developing people is going to take time and maintaining. Okay. I mean, I don't I don't hear a lot of conversation really about how much time it takes. And so what I mean by that is to maintain, first of all, to acquire you, to train you, and then to, you know, to develop you and to retain you, all of that, it has to just be a cost of business, and you have to know that going in, that it's to make that default assumption that this is going to be something that in order to do it well is going to be a large time commitment, right?
So I love that, because one of the things that we're challenging a little bit is, hey, a company holds a training, they bring somebody in 2 hours, and at the end of the training, they expect their people to just all of a sudden be able to exhibit those behaviors or those things. And I can imagine, in training a horse, it probably doesn't work like that. You can't do one session, 2 hours, and expect the results that you're looking for. I don't understand why we have thought that people would be any different in their learning cycle. So I love that. It's a journey. It's not a one-time event. What else you got? You said there's 5.
Yeah. So that's a big one, and you're exactly right on horses. A lot of times with horses, we'll have this expectation that it's going to be X, Y, Z, just like you said, the same with people. I mean, if you really think about it, it's just not, it's going to require some time. Or in order to transformation and change takes place over a long period of time. This is a big one. This is one that I don't hear a lot about. Our 5 things aren't earth-shattering, something that I've developed. I'm just giving you the way that we implement them. But this one I don't hear a lot about. And the second thing that we do with everyone is we attempt, or our principle is to know that we as leaders or managers have the most influence on what's going on. So what I'm talking about is responsibility. So the first place that we like to look, let's just say something goes terribly wrong, or even if we're going to improve or whatever the situation is, we attempt to develop a habit with our managers and with me, which is an ongoing pursuit of saying, hold on a minute, before I start pointing the finger and talking to you and looking at all the things of why everything went wrong, the very first place that I need to realize that the number one thing that influences the result that I get, I can't control you, okay? And I can't control a horse. It's the same deal. This horse has its own free will, okay? And so what he decides is going to be totally up to him, the same as someone that works here. However, inside of that, what influences it? Well, me as their direct manager, me as their employer, me as their leader. And the same goes with horse. I'm the leader. I'm going to present myself as the leader in this situation. And I have a tremendous influence. And I need to really take that seriously and take a close look, first of all, and say, what could I have done in this situation? That is basically the takeaway, is that immediately when something happens, that the first place that we look is right here and say, what could I have done, or what could we have done as an organization to either prevent this in the future, or what could we have done to have it happen? I think this is huge because I see it overlooked a lot, where we're just going down, we're bypassing that, which
It's so,
is a big
yeah.
concept.
Well, and that's so consistent with the message. So in part of my elite training academy, I'm working with some trainers and I say, hey, if the participants aren't doing what you need them to do after the training, that's not the participant's fault. That means that your message didn't resonate. That means that you didn't prepare that in a way that was logical, easy, or functional for them. And I asked them to ask themselves 2 questions. How did you contribute to this situation by either what you did or by what you failed to do in order to get the result that you wanted? So I love that concept of ownership and responsibility. Again, something that I think all trainers, coaches, leaders, HR people really need to take and say, hey, let's turn the perception inwards first and understand, how did I contribute to this situation before we start going, they're not doing what they're told to do. I love that.
Right on. Yep, that's awesome. That's exactly it. The third thing, this may sound, you may have a hard time with this, and maybe you don't, but it might come off as sounded a little different, and that is, you gotta love them, man. You have to love them. And the same thing goes with the horse, really. I mean, you can't, if you're indifferent or you're a little bit negative towards a person or your horse, your result, you have to love them. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree with other people, or you don't have to agree with what your horse does either. It's the same thing, but you have to love them. And so, okay, fine, Shane, what does that mean? I mean, how do we go about doing that? And when we bring new people on, the first thing that we do is in our initial first meetings, it's when they come on board, we're very clear that, hey, we understand that this is a relationship and you're half of it. We ask you not to take a look at, because your money is coming from us, that we're at a different level. We're on an equal level with you as far as value as a human being. And we respect that, and we know that. And also, by the way, Jay, we know that if we don't provide you with what you need, you're not going to provide us with what we need. And so we just like to make that so clear, and then not just say it, but try to follow up with it. We Another thing that we do in that, I just want to talk a little bit more about that, is that, we surely encourage communication in that. Is, please feel that you can always talk to us about what's going on with you. we attempt, this is kind of a hard one, but in loving them, we try attempt to honor their perspective. And I heard a guest recently on your show talk about listening, to listen. And she talked about listening and understand and taking the time to understand the why. It's so important to give people value. Again, you don't have to agree with what they're talking about. They can give you an idea that is not relevant to your thing. But if you take the time to just honor their perspective, okay, and find out a little bit about the why of what they're trying to communicate to you, it increases connectivity and they feel value. This Joe Caruso has this idea that people don't like you because of who you are or what you do. They like you because of how they feel when they're with you. Okay.
Oh, it's
This
so
is
true.
so important as leadership. And the best way to do that is just simply to take the time to honor their perspective.
Well, and I love that concept of loving them, right? Because let's think about a loving relationship. There's trust, there's open communication, there's, hey, I know this person has my best interest at heart. So if they're giving me advice, if they're giving me a suggestion, if they're giving me a recommendation or something to follow, I know within my heart of hearts, because they love me, they're doing this for my best interest. Now, I may choose to do that or choose not to do that. I may take the advice or not take the advice, but at least it gets past that sort of first barrier of who is this person and why are you asking me to do this and what is it? So I can imagine that, as you develop the relationship, whether it's with a coaching client or even with a horse that you're training, that continues to sort of build throughout that experience together. Would that be accurate, Shane?
That is accurate. You bet it's accurate. It's a great point. And Jay, you brought up something else in your last statement there that I didn't bring up that's important and it is part of love, and that is trust. And so what I mean by trust is to initially to have the courage as leaders to extend trust. Okay.
Mm,
Until we have to go kind of out on a limb and extend trust until that trust is broken. Here's an example. Well, with horses, we have to, because they feel, if we feel hesitation or if we feel fear or if we feel like they pick up on that and they cue and they have a negative reaction. People, individuals, it's the same. So
yeah.
here's an example of what I mean extending trust. First of all, we communicate our our unit, our team, okay, when we have a customer or a client that has an issue, let's just say I get a phone call. Hey, Shane, your manager, your guy over here told me XYZ or did this or said this or whatever the issue is. The first thing that I do is I put a pause on that. Okay.
Mm,
And then I go to our team because that's where my number one trust is until it's broken. Okay. Now, this is a little bit harsh, but if a client calls me, I'm just telling you, my number one trust is not with you, it's with my team.
sure.
My number one trust is with my team. So I go to my team and I say, hey, you're my first line here. We're going to have a united, find out what happened here. Then we're going to present a united thing. But I always, if those people feel undermined, that you don't trust them, and sometimes you can't, sometimes the trust is broken and then you have to go through all that and decide if you're going to maintain it or try to repair it, which takes time and all that. But it's so important to to trust these people until the trust is broken. I think it's a huge concept. I think it's super important to the cooperation that you're going to get, because people, if they don't feel like you trust them, I mean, that's the core of the relationship, right?
Well, and I think that's smart. And I know it sounds harsh, where you say, "Hey, trust my team more than a client." But if you're not extending love and trust to your team, I guarantee the team's not extending love and trust to the client in the way that they could be. And you start that process from that center of the ripple, the stone in the pond, and then it extends outward. So I love that extension of trust and making sure that the trust isn't necessarily a gullible trust, but one that's saying, "Hey, we're coming at this. We want the same thing. We have the same mission. We have the same values, goals, and let's operate, with that as a starting point and move forward from there."
That's exactly right on. And you said it, they're going to operate the way that you trust them. They're going to
Yeah.
operate. And let me be clear about that. The fact that I trust, that I give a little more credence and a little more trust to my team does not mean that I disvalue you, or I'm just saying the first response is to come to my team and try to extend them trust to see how we can make this well. Now, if they breach the trust, we have to figure out how to put that back together. But I'll tell you, in my experience, most of the time, when I've established trust when I've extended trust, okay, and I've shown that most of the time, my trust is placed in the right spot with my closest team rather than the
And
client. But we obviously we have to love our clients. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, so for
Well,
sure.
and the interesting thing, yeah, absolutely on the loving the client. The interesting thing though is I think sometimes, especially and maybe this has been your experience, Shane, but there's been different times where a client has said something to me about their culture, about their work environment, and has been 100% honest, although that wasn't the whole truth, or it wasn't everything that was going on. It was their perception of what was going on, or was being communicated. It was as honest as the information that they had and the perception that they were able to take. It didn't mean that they were lying, being dishonest, or anything else. When actually, spending time with my team and evaluating, we got a very different picture. We got different data points. We got more of an objective analysis. Now, I could either say, well, the client said this and I'm going to have to trust it, or I can trust my team that has done this before, that, we've built up that relationship and everything else, and then have maybe a difficult conversation with the client like, hey, I understand that this is the perception, but here's what we're actually seeing, and this is what we're actually undergoing, and this is what our research is telling us. How does that line up with maybe what you understand? And having a good coaching conversation to follow there. So I don't think it's harsh. I think it's actually a really strong point to say these are the relationships that I've cultivated, and eventually those relationships that I'm cultivating extend out in a beautiful way to everybody that we serve, clients, stakeholders, people on social media that hear our different thought perspectives. So I really like that. I appreciate that, Shane.
You're exactly right. The client probably most likely just has a different perspective. They're making meaning out of what happened, but it doesn't make sense to you. The opposite is, okay, or the other way of going about it is to take their meaning on yourself, believe it, reprimand or do whatever you're going to do to your own person before you extend to them your primary trust. And see, when you do that, if your team member knows what you have communicated to this client, it is extremely damaging if you don't give them the first line of trust. It's damaging to the relationship with your team member, is what it is.
Yeah.
The our out of our five pieces of leadership pieces, number four is just accountability. You have to hold them accountable, and it's not. We have to hold people accountable for the agreements that we get. We take pretty. I feel like we do the best at our communication to get agreements going up front, but it's difficult, and this is one that is avoided a lot. For It's easy to avoid. Okay, it's easy for me because difficult conversations are difficult. you know Having those
Yeah.
conversations, it's really just easier not to let it go, or to make up excuses in our mind and kind of let the little problem linger, or give people hints and not have complete clarity, because maybe we're afraid of hurting their feelings, maybe we're worried about what the end result's going to be, maybe there's so many reasons, but really, if you take a look at it, most of those reasons are about what's going on inside of our thoughts and our hearts about, this fear that we've been out, and how we feel. A lot of times, people, I've found that to be true. That when I finally, not finally, but when I go and do it, because I've tried to cultivate a habit of doing the difficult things, because I know from avoiding it, it's not a good idea. But when I finally do it, okay, when I go about doing it, what I find is that a lot of times it's received. They kind of already knew that this conversation need to happen, and so our deal is accountability, immediately, and just to make sure that we're really having clarity on the desired result. If we have the agreement, we have to have accountability. And if you don't, then it just begins chaos.
It's so important, Shane. Like when we think about accountability, one of the things that we say when we're trying to help leaders understand building culture is the behaviors you tolerate, you normalize. The behaviors you reward, you reinforce. And that whole not holding somebody accountable or tolerating maybe a missed deadline or tolerating a shift or some kind of reaction. And sometimes you're right. You know, it's just like, oh gosh, is this worth it? Or do I really want to have this conversation? Or what retaliation is going to happen if I have that? Those are all internal fears. And if we're allowing a behavior to exist or to go unaccounted for, essentially, we're basically saying that what you did was okay and you should continue to do so. Humans are
Yeah,
patternistic. So I love that.
for sure. You know, if I've mentioned agreements, and so we attempt to, after we feel that the training, we attempt to get an agreement. It's not always a written agreement, but we at least we get a verbal agreement on the desired result. Now, the goal, right? Our goal is to not need to manage the means. Our goal is that you see the result clearly. You see the desired result, and that you understand how to operate. You understand basically the rules of engagement inside of your way to the desired result. And so that therefore I don't have to manage the means. But let me just tell you, if you've probably tried this, and if you haven't, this is a time consuming process to be able to reach that point. Because here's what usually happens. People that are subordinates, they want to please us. They want to do what's right. They want to impress you. They want to look good for themselves. And so what they'll do a lot of times is uh they'll begin and they'll get to the decision point. And the decision point is this: my training, I'm either not clear on my training of what to do here, or it wasn't covered, or this didn't go on. And so now I'm at a decision point. I think I should do this, therefore I execute. Okay. Until we get to the point where you can manage those means, that's a poor decision. And so what we're asking you to do is, unless you are 100% certain, when you get to the decision point, that you get clarity on before you act on your assumption. Because acting on those assumptions, it's your productivity just goes down and everything starts to go to hell. Here's also the difference, and which I don't think a lot of our people that we're asking, a lot of our team members, they don't really understand. And it's really because we haven't told them that, hey, in order to look good and increase the trust, it's not that we expect you to already know what to do and you're brilliant because you already know how to do the job and all that. In order to make this work better, when you ask for backup, what that does, it increases the trust. And here's why: because it demonstrates that you care about the result deeply, to the point
Mhm.
that you're not going to sacrifice. Let's just say it was a bad decision, but if it would have worked out, you would have looked great. But you're not willing to do that because you care about doing it right so much. You care about the result, that when you get to the decision point, first of all, you have the awareness, and then you get to the decision point, and then you say, hey, here's where I'm at, team leader.
Mhm.
I'm at a place, either I didn't get clear on the training or this wasn't covered. I don't know what to do here. And then make a recommendation, right? We always don't just like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I think it should be this. Now, this is this is bringing value. You want to bring value to an organization, look at the thing, determine your best recommendation, and then have the courage to make the recommendation and get clarity. Now, a lot of times, depending on how long their level of knowledge, or depend on a lot of things, maybe it's good and maybe it's not. So hopefully, if the recommendation doesn't work, we've been in business 30 years. You've been here for 3 days, and your recommendation. No, seriously, I'm taking your
Yeah.
recommendation. I appreciate that. I'm going to honor your perspective, but I hope that I don't want to hurt your feelings in saying that we've tried that and it didn't work, and here's why, and let you move forward. And so those decision points, coaching people to just stop, to have the awareness, instead of, because sometimes it'll happen so fast. Our people will get to the decision point. Hey, it looks like it should be this, and then they'll just go. Okay. And a
Yep.
lot of times that's a wreck. And so when people are aware of that and they begin to have the awareness and then they choose to get clarity, what happens is the trust level goes up so much faster. And then what happens, and that is actually how managing the means starts to, then we need to manage the means less because we trust that they care about how they get to the desired result.
Yeah, we have a rule that we like to implement in companies called the 3-to-1 rule, which is if an employee has a challenge, if a team has a challenge, they have to come up with 3 ideas, and out of those 3 ideas, one recommendation. And when they bring that to their team leader, their supervisor, their director, what we find is we have an impact of creating critical thinkers. And a lot of times, the recommendation is usually pretty accurate, but it's one of those where they feel safe, they feel like they can bring these ideas, or maybe there's a small tweak to it. But it is one of those things of we want people to solve their own problems. So I love what you're saying there.
Yeah. The last one, just to wrap up what we do, I mean, it's kind of, it just fits in, and that's just a reward. But the reason that we list this as our five is that it kind of goes back to number one. We need to remember to reward by, and it doesn't always have to be by, direct compensation, which everybody appreciates. That's, we can't overlook that for sure. But, a reward can be showing concern for a person. It can be honest and genuine compliments of taking the time to do it, which, I mean, we all know. And I have specialized for years in only being able to see what's wrong. And I am a master at, I can go into the area and look and I can tell you immediately 9 things that are wrong and need to be fixed immediately. Right. And I overlooked 109 things that were done that perfectly that day. And
Yep.
when people hear that, this is from personal experience. You beat them to death, man. And then they're just like, they don't feel like they can do anything right, and they're walking out. And I know that from doing it. And so taking really the time to just to be aware of it, because it comes back to one and two. We have to love them. That's number two.
I wish I would have heard that message maybe 15, 20 years ago, because it was a hard lesson for myself as well. And part of it is I know that I have some perfectionist tendencies. I know that I have different standards and levels of, so I actually have to ask myself my own question sometimes of, is it wrong or is it wrong for Jay? And if it's wrong for Jay, that means that's just my incredibly unique standards. But I love what you said there is really kind of taking a step back and looking at what did they do right, or what was the positive outcomes of this? Because you're without that intentionality of doing so, I think that that's something that can really be lost. And if we're not rewarding behavior, we're not going to see it again. I did all these things and it wasn't even noticed. It wasn't even acknowledged. Why am I going to bother doing all those things again?
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that reward. So these are the 5 things that you take as your approach, and I love these. This is such a great framework, Shane. Um, in our last couple of minutes here together, can you give our audience, things that you've learned? Obviously, this framework is hugely, hugely valuable, but things that you've learned, maybe that in working with horses and working with humans, obviously both mammals both have hearts, both have kind considerations, both can also have some negative reactions in different cases. What are some things that you would leave our audience with to really think about in working with people that maybe you've learned from working with horses?
I think that really the two biggest things are you know the two ideas. Number one is, like you said, responsibility and ownership. One of the ways that horses demonstrate this is kind of interesting. Horses operate in a band or a herd. Usually it's mostly mares and young males and a couple of older stud horses or stallions and a larger group of mares. And so they operate in groups and they have safety in those groups in the wild. Okay, I'm not talking about domestic horses, feral or wild horses. And so they're prey animals, and so they have safety in this group. Okay. If usually a young horse misbehaves in some way, the leaders, which are usually, there's one, usually of the older mares and a couple of the mares that are leaders, they'll run this young individual, male or female, out of the herd by
Hmm.
themselves off. They'll do that by baring their teeth and running and threatening to kick and just push and push and push until he's isolated away from the herd. Now, um, it's a good thing that horses don't have probably the ability to really think this through, because the things that they may be thinking is, they never told me the rules, and here I am all by myself. Now, remember, moment by moment, my life's at risk from a pack of
Hmm.
wolves or cats or bear or whatever. I mean, you know what I'm saying? My safety is over there and I'm out of it. So literally my life is in danger. So just think of all the things. Well, nobody told me the rules. You know, what the hell did they expect? Or that wasn't fair, or I'm too young, or, you know, and you could go on and on and on with the list. But what happens is immediately, okay, it doesn't take very long. That horse changes his behavior and he comes to the edge of herd and he paces a lines back and forth and he communicates to the other ones, to the leaders of the group, hey, I'm back in and I'm compliant and I'm totally available for you. And I have no issues whatsoever. And he communicates that by putting his head down low to the ground and walking this line. And he'll actually lick his lips and kind of make a chewing motion, and he's not eating. These things are subtle communications to the leaders that, hey, look, man, I'm sorry. I want to come back in and I'm going to follow the rules. Okay. And so what happens is, when they see this, they let him back in. It doesn't take very long, and then they totally forget it, like it never even happened. Okay. So when you look at this little process, it's interesting to think of what can, uh, of all the different parallels that you can make with
Yeah.
people. I like the personal responsibility and then just letting go and forgiveness, because truly my last words are is that the most important thing that we can do as leaders, the bar none, okay, because truly the largest influence that we have on results and the behavior of our team and our people, the people that are our subordinates, is us. Okay. And really it's what's inside of your heart and soul, and the behavior that you do. And that the time that we recognize that and commit to working on ourselves, commit to this relationship with ourselves, because we can only give to the edge of how we feel about ourselves. I believe that this is the most important thing that we can do, is take the responsibility and then commit to becoming better ourselves, because it's the only way that we're going to have that our people are going to have the results that we're looking for, and to have the most positive impact on other people and make our contribution to the world and all of that.
Love it, Shane. Powerful recommendations. And I love that story about how they interact. And it's funny, being a behavioral scientist, a human behavioral scientist, realistically, that's not far from our ancient ancestors and how tribes formed and how different relationships formed. So, in that forgiveness and in that sort of moving on from it, that's something that I think that we as a people continue to struggle with in some cases, is letting go of the past and really being able to say, okay, let's move forward in a positive way. So, such a powerful lesson. I really appreciate you sharing that. Shane, how would our audience get a hold of you if they were interested in connecting and learning more?
Sure. We're all over media and at thehorsemanshipjourney.com.
Love it. So thank you so much for being our guest here on the Talent Forge, Shane.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate the opportunity and appreciate your show. Best of continued success.
Thank you so much. And thank you for listening into this episode of the Talent Forge, where we are shaping the future of talent development.